Hello and welcome to HIMSSCast. I'm your host, Jonah Comstock. I'm joined today by Healthcare Finance News Managing Editor Susan Morse. Hi, Sue.
Hi, Jonah.
And we're joined today by our guest, AJ Loiacono. AJ is the CEO of Capital Rx, and he advises policymakers on this very topical and complex issue of drug pricing in the United States. So we're here to talk to him a little bit about that, about some recent news from Capital Rx of their launch of Capital Rx Advantage and how that plays into this story. So welcome to the show, AJ.
Thank you so much, Jonah. It's great to be here.
Why don't we just start with a little introduction? Tell us a little bit about yourself and about Capital Rx.
Yeah, sure. I've been in the pharmacy supply chain for 21 years and counting. I often say I started in the most boring part of the pharmaceutical supply chain, which is supply chain logistics on the plant side in the software department. So we used to convert or help install old MRP, MRP2 modules, help modernize ERP systems. I did that for 7 years, traveled the globe, worked for a variety of different manufacturers. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was getting a master class in drug pricing and supply chain logistics, which would help me later in life. Shortly after I moved to the opposite end of the supply chain, I started a company called Traveris that did audit and procurement for self-insured payers. And this gave me the opportunity to understand the last mile in the supply chain, engaging with the ultimate payer, employer groups and health plans, and the PBMs that process these claims. And there's a real disconnect. And I think this is what led me to create Capital Rx with my co-founders, Joe and Ryan, which was nothing makes sense in the US supply chain where, if you think about it, I often use this example because it's a very simple way to understand where things go kind of offline, if you will, in a wrong direction. Everything that comes out of a manufacturing plant has a price. You have a pallet of drugs. I don't care if it's brand, generic, specialty. It has a unit cost, and it's being sold to either directly to a hospital system or a pharmacy chain or to wholesalers like McKesson and AmerisourceBergen. And go figure, they have drug prices. But when you get to the PBM end of the business, the employer and the ultimate payer, including the federal government, all the prices magically disappear. And so when I used to read these PBM contracts for the first time, I would just scratch my head and say, is there a missing schedule or an amendment? Where are the drug prices? And there aren't any. It's very complex. It's annual effective rates and classification system around single source, generic, multi-source, DAW handling, limited supply. And it really doesn't tell you anything about cost. And why would people support a system in which buyers and sellers can't freely communicate and understand prices? Because it benefits the people that manage those procedures today. And so when we created Capital Rx, it was basically under the thought process, nothing is sacred. Let's create a market just the same way every other efficient market works. So I don't care if it's gasoline, real estate, sneakers online. When buyers and sellers freely communicate on price settles itself. I don't need someone to be between myself in a grocery store and myself in a gas station to help me determine what the appropriate price is. It almost sounds comical that these large entities saying, only we can get to low price and only with our guidance can we guide the country to low cost prescriptions. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. Just put buyers and sellers together. Price settles itself and focus on the efficiency. So we built out our own technology platform. We're a full service PBM. We service employer groups, municipalities, unions, health plans. And what we provide is an efficient, transparent model. So our technology platform, Judy, short for adjudication, powers our entire company and gives us the efficiency to operate this transparent model. We call it a clearinghouse model where buyers and sellers freely communicate on price, the pharmacies, the employers, and the patients. It's a single ledger of reconciliation. No one is hidden in a transaction. No reimbursement is taken away where someone can't see it. And what you're doing is you're finally transmitting real price. You're finally having the payer understand what's fair. And what we wanted to do is focus all the effort that legacy systems have focused on opacity and hiding price and manipulating price. Let's focus all that effort on just better service, better outcomes, and delivered on a better technology platform. So it's a little lengthy, I know, but pharmacy benefits is very complex.
It's a great platform for us to start the discussion on. So thank you. And Sue, I'll kick it over to you for the first question.
Well, I'm still trying to get a handle on what you do, AJ. Are you taking the place of a pharmacy benefit manager as this
Correct.
middleman?
Yep.
And then who are you selling to?
Yeah, we sell to employer groups directly, as well as municipalities, townships, unions. We service plans as small as 500 lives, as large as 150,000 lives, I think of our largest client. And our average client is about 5,000 lives.
Are you able to sell the drugs more cheaply than what your clients would get otherwise? Or is there already a set price going in?
Yeah, great question. People ask us all the time, like, wow, like that was a really amazing bid that we did, or business that we've won. We have clients, we're going into our 4th year of operation, that have 3 years of negative trend, and they've never seen 3 years of negative trend, let alone 1 year of negative trend. And they're like, how is it possible that you buy drugs cheaper than incredibly large entities? Like, well, the first thing is you don't have drug prices. So whatever your contract states, or whatever you think you were sold by a broker consultant, you don't have real prices. You have a game, you have a shell. So that's the first thing, is the price isn't real. The second thing is, under the current system, a PBM or carrier has the ability to set any price at the point of sale. People often think the pharmacy is selling the drug at the price. No, the pharmacy buys its inventory, stocks its shelves. The PBM and carrier tells the pharmacy what you're going to sell that drug for at that point in time. And you can't communicate anything else to the member, even if your price is lower, directly.
Do you have to deal with rebates the way PBMs do? Do you,
Sure,
and all of that complication?
Yeah, rebates are an important part of the supply chain. It's alive and well. We call it, patient access, and pharma pays for that right. It does lower what we call list price down further. I think there's an entire segment we could have around rebates. What most people would say is, why doesn't pharma just sell it to me for the price that they can sell it for? So we talk about list price goes up every year in brand drugs or specialty drugs. What people don't understand is gross to net since about 2014, branded specialty drugs are negative. And people are like, wait, how is that possible? I go, the list price is going up, but the net price, net of discount, rebates, patient assistance, other couponing, all this money that pharma has to throw into the system to either abide by certain regulations or access patients more efficiently. This brings the average pharmaceutical manufacturer's net price to about 46-ish%, off of list. And so it plays an important role. Is it here to stay? I would like to say no, it shouldn't stay. I think at one point or another, the federal government and pharma needs to get together and say, can you just sell us a price without all these layers and all this confusion? And I think we're getting there. I think you're about to see a preview of some of it in some upcoming legislation.
Well, it's such a hot topic right now. And I think you got at the heart of it when you said people want it simplified. And so the government right now, Biden administration, is proposing to have Medicare negotiate drug prices. What could be wrong with this? It'll lower the cost of drugs. And pharma says much is wrong with this. People won't have access. There won't be the innovation. And then they say, it's the insurers. They should lower the copay. And the insurers say the price of the drug is the price of the drug. Can you sort that out for us and how you think this will work or won't work?
Yeah, I think this is exactly part of my point, which is what we're seeing now, which is what is the real price of drugs in the United States? I think generic drugs, you get a sense of that with a lot of the transparency that's being provided today by organizations like us. And brand drugs, you're getting some semblance of the truth, but it's just so multi-layered and so complex. And, if we look at the Medicare negotiations that are being suggested. So Medicare, I think the Medicare Modernization Act was '03. I think final law or approval was '06. If you believe some of the myth around that, when it became law, was that pharma was in the room when it was written, and that this was a good thing for the American public. I genuinely believe that, but the intention of many things are often taken advantage of by different parties that have self-interest. And I think one of them was some negotiation rights. And that right now, the federal government, without knowing it back in '03 and '06, that they were kind of taking billions of dollars off the table in their negotiation power. And that right now, pharma, likes this. They feel as if they have access, they have good pricing, and then if this would change, it would severely cripple them. And, immediately, if you see some of the reports, I can't speak for some of the lobbying arms of the pharmaceutical industry, they're saying they're immediately going to challenge and sue should this type of legislation emerge where the government suddenly regains control over the negotiation rights around the rebates in particular. And I think it's very telling, why, and I think this goes back to what is the price of your product? I often say if you're selling a product and buyers and sellers freely communicate on price will settle itself. What is the price of your drug? What is the worth of your drug? Does the medical community believe your drug is worthwhile? Are the outcomes positive? Do payers see this as a viable product? Then your price will be supported at a certain point. But because we have all these layers of opacity and confusion, it's almost impossible for someone to understand what the true price is for, let's just say, a biologic, a hyper expensive drug. Because let's be fair, the pharmaceutical industry isn't going to sue the federal government over generic drugs.
Right.
This is around the most expensive end, which is brand, legacy, simple molecule, and I think biologic drugs. And so what is the real price is what I think everyone's trying to get to. And there's 100 different ways you could look at the price of drugs. And oftentimes pharma itself doesn't even look at the true price of its drugs appropriately because everything's in a silo. I'm on the market access team and I deal with rebates, and I'm on the, supply chain side and I'm selling at a negotiated unit cost. And someone else down the line is dealing with couponing and patient assistance budgets and foundation budgets. And, someone's dealing with 340B pricing, impact. And so this all comes back to gross to net, which ultimately, putting aside programs that are, focused upon providing access to medication to disadvantaged communities or segments of the population, I'm just saying gross to net. If I were to ask 3 subject matter experts what the true price is for a specific biologic drug, you would get very different answers.
Well, speaking of price, and you raised some very good points. People compare US to Canadian prices.
Mhm.
And yes, it's cheaper to get some drugs in Canada. The price is lower, but pharma argues, well, if you need a specialty drug, it's not available in Canada. The innovation is happening in the US, apparently. Do you agree with this?
Well, I think the innovation is happening in the US, as some of my colleagues would be quick to remind people in this argument, is the federal government pays for quite a bit of research and development. Nonprofit, hospitals, universities, And this
Yeah.
later becomes commercialized with drug manufacturers. So I think it's a gray area to say that only pharma is solely responsible for innovation. I don't think that is true. I think most people would say, come on, let's be fair. Our nonprofit university systems do quite a bit here of research. I think almost every major university that has any type of, I would say, high-end program is certainly investing heavily in this. And so, I think the question becomes then, yes, I do agree we're approaching an era through gene therapy that we're seeing outright cures, and we're just on the cusp of this. This is going to take years to kind of begin to see how it evolves. But the counter argument is, well, we need pharma to invest in these things, or who else will? And this is why I say it's a gray area. I do think there's a public-private partnership, but you can't have a system where drug pricing is a mystery. I will say what is very helpful whenever you have a single payer system or a centralized paying system, you understand what price is. It's not as if the Canadian government is like, today at 12 o'clock, the price of this drug is X, and in 15 minutes, it's going to change again. That's the US healthcare system. If you've ever seen a claim run for a single payer, I mean, just one employer group, one healthcare company, it looks like drugs are changing price every hour of every day for every medication. And that's just the starting point. That's not even gross to net. And so I do think my answer here is it has to be a public-private partnership, but we do need centralized reporting on what the heck a fair price is. That's what's missing. And until we have that conversation, I think the government's right to continue to ask for more and more oversight and better rules to keep these various entities accountable. And until they come around on their sole volition to do that, I think you're going to see a little bit of a turf war.
Another aspect of this is that pharma very much is a global business, right? There are pharma companies, major pharma companies that are not based in the United States, and even those that are have customers all over the world.
Sure.
So it seems almost strange that the United States exerts such, our kind of messed up health system exerts such a force on the price of drugs everywhere.
Yes.
And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that relationship to what we decide on our federal level and the global pharmaceutical market.
Yeah, I mean, I think pharma spends an enormous amount of money when they launch a drug. What's the fair price? And it's, fair price, and it's all interconnected on some level. They're thinking, I've plowed how much money into the development of this drug and, amortized over time. How much am I going to make back this money to my shareholders and show a profit margin? And, how do I maximize that? How do I maximize revenue relative to market access? If I charge too much in a country, I may not gain access. They may just tell me the price. So the default always comes when you solve for the world's pricing, whatever your shortfall is. I feel like the US is part of the equation of who's going to pick up the mess in aisle 7. It's the United States. It'd be like, turns out France was really tough. So was Germany. So was the UK. Switzerland showed me no mercy right down the line. And then be like, well, we're short an extra $1.5 billion. Who could possibly pay for that? The United States. Yeah. And, this is where you see starting point prices that are 200, 300, 400% higher than other markets. And so I often point out, let's take the most complex electronic device you could buy, a graphics card, a GPU. Let's take an NVIDIA, GPU, state-of-the-art graphics card. It's the same price in the UK as it is in Taiwan, as it is in Canada, as it is in the United States. There's no difference. It's within $100 of each other converted. Why? Well, it's not that they didn't spend billions of dollars to develop that. The folks at NVIDIA will tell you they spent billions to develop that graphics card. So they certainly have costs and concerns, but it's the same price in every market, and they have to be competitive. There's not like, you know what, everyone was willing to pay 300 for this, but thank God the US, I could charge $3,000 for this.
Right.
That doesn't exist in any other market. And I feel like it goes back to this layers of opacity and complexity. And I think the federal government and legislation is starting to understand the importance of this. I think payers are starting to get tired of this. And I think pharma has to make a decision at one point or another. Are they going to become part of an efficient, modern economic process? And I think also legacy PBMs and carriers have to make that decision, because who benefits from a lot of this opacity? One of my favorite charts to present to people is pharma. I don't shed too many tears for, because I feel a lot of their folly is self-inflicted wounds. But the person or the entities that benefit the most from drug inflation in the US are the carriers and the PBMs. And this is a very simple thing to prove. Just pull up the stock price of the 6 largest manufacturers in the world in the 21st century. So from 2000 till today, Novartis, Pfizer, Merck, Sanofi, they're flat. Their stock prices have barely increased. And now let's just take something like United or Cigna. United is up close to 3,000%, Cigna probably in the 1,100% range. And the point of it is, the reason why is that in 2004, pharma lost control of the supply chain. They made some very bad decisions, because basically the carriers and the PBMs went to them in 2004 and said, what would you pay if I created like different tiers of drugs? And if you're preferred, we push you first. And if it's they're creating pay for play access. And it was such a success. They said, about 5 years moved past 2004, we're in 2010. They said, what if I just excluded your competitors? What would you pay for that? And they're like, I'll pay a lot for you to exclude my competitors. And then they made so much money on it, carriers and PBMs literally resell rebates. It's like its own trade world. So the big 3 probably represent 90 to 95%, I would imagine at this point, of rebate payments in the country, because all roads lead back to the big 3. And I think this is important to remember, because when you look at this stock price and stock performance relative to manufacturing, PBMs and carriers relative to manufacturers, people will say, well, isn't it the medical that's driving some of that? And the answer is absolutely not. You speak to a medical underwriter, they're like, I'm lucky if I break even here. The reality is if you see all the big 3, in this case, United, Cigna, and CVS are publicly traded. So you look at their quarterly report, it's almost the same press release summary each quarter. Cigna beats on pharmacy benefits. United lifted from pharmacy. CVS improvement through pharmacy benefits. And so it's a system that feeds upon itself. It's been around for 25 plus years and hasn't changed in any way, shape, or form, because it's a wonderful place to be in if you continue to use the old economics.
AJ, this is fascinating. And I'm wondering if you can talk about how do we balance all of this? Because when it goes down to the patient and the consumer, they don't know the price usually until they get to the pharmacy counter. You have big pharma putting millions into drugs, billions to get it to market. 1 out of 10 makes it. They need to recoup some of that investment cost.
Yes.
And then you have people who get drugs who very much need them to stay alive saying, I can't afford my drugs. It's either pay food for the month or buy my drugs. What do you see as the balance? And then you have the PBMs in between who are making a ton of money. If you could wave a magic wand and say, this is what the government should do, this is what should happen, do you have any recommendations for how we handle the high price of drugs?
What's interesting is the federal government already has part of the solution, and they already manage it. So within CMS is a division, that basically reports pricing. It's called NADAC pricing, National Average Drug Acquisition Cost. It's used for Medicaid reimbursement in dozens of states. And basically what it is it's a survey to pharmacies. And it's basically saying, what did you acquire the drug for? And what this is an honest assessment of what acquisition cost is. It's starting to kind of give people a visible indication of what a fair price is. I always point this out, 98.5% of drugs at retail are reported, using acquisition costs. And we have found mail and specialty partners that will also provide a list price on an NDC 11, the absolute limit of specificity. This is the drug in this dispensing size, this milligram, et cetera. This is what our unit cost is. And this is important because the federal government already has something and it works. We, as a PBM, use NADAC pricing. We contracted with all of our retail pharmacies. And, why do retail pharmacies like it? Because unfortunately, under the current system, they're being taken advantage of. Where if you speak to any retail pharmacy, especially independents, they'll tell you between clawbacks and 16 different MAC lists, I am being punished. I buy a drug for $17. I see the payment go out for 27. The employer is paying and they reimburse me $8. What am I supposed to do with that? And so the system needs a measure of what's a fair price. So when we introduced NADAC pricing to the commercial market, what we did is we said there's no MAC list. There's no manipulation of price. There's no clawback rights from us. The federal government is setting a price. And if you would like to beat that as a retail organization, you can. No one's going to ever say, hey, you can't provide me $4 generics or $0 generics, which some big box stores and, I would say even independents as well as grocery chains have wonderful programs. Be like, great, you're providing value, but we need something that kind of sets a ceiling. Like, how do we understand what a real price is? Because unfortunately, I can't see what a fair price is from a claims file that shows the price changing every hour of every day. I don't even know. I don't know if the starting price is fair. And that's a discount off of a source price. So 99% of all contracts use AWP, average wholesale pricing, which comes from Wolters Kluwer Medispan, a private company. And I got to be honest, I think it's disconnected from reality. I don't know where they're getting their prices from because they're trying to tell us that generic prices are gently inflating each year, especially if you look over the last 5 years. We did a study for AMCP. We basically took the top 1,200 generic drugs priced using AWP versus the federal government NADAC. AMCP, recognized this and they said, this is an amazing study because AWP is inflating 1%. And over the same 5-year period for these drugs, the NADAC pricing deflated 50%. Who received that value? Not the patient, not the plan. What lies in between? The carriers and PBMs gladly absorb it. And this is just one example. So I think the first part of it is NADAC pricing. And I think the federal government recognizes that, where today, I would say about 600 pharmacies and chains report in to NADAC, but some of the larger chains do not. And I think the federal government is going to look very closely at what Alabama is doing with AAC, their pricing index, where they basically force every single retailer to report pricing in. So they're doing it. And what that will do, we did a study on this as well, is further deflate prices and provide what we would say an even finer point on pricing and expand it to all 100% of the drugs out there. And I think this is the first step. Without understanding what a fair price is, and I use very simple examples because it's the only way I think we could try and rationalize what's going on in healthcare is if I were to try and sell you a 12-pack of popsicles for $700, you would be like, no way. But this happens all the time in drug spend.
So we're about at our time, but I haven't even asked you yet about your recent news with Capital RX Advantage. So why don't you run us through that real quick and maybe kind of try to put it in the context of the conversation we've been having.
Well, it brings it all together nicely. So, thank you for asking. So, one of the things that I point out is discount cards. I'm sure everyone has seen discount cards for prescriptions. Let me be frank. Discount cards should not exist in the United States if the carriers and PBMs just did their damn job. Let's just pause for a second and think about that statement. Why do discount cards exist? Because PBMs and carriers artificially manipulate price. Back to my point, drugs are not changing every hour of every day in every pharmacy. That's ridiculous. So I always say we have a system in the United States, Susan, to your point of it's unfortunate of winners and losers at the register. Even if I have insurance, am I today's winner or loser? And in the past, when we had more of the population of the US had flat copays, you really couldn't see it. If I'm paying $5 and my employer is paying 30 to 27 to 58, who cares? And, add a zero on brand and 2 zeros on specialty. But the whole point of it is with this system of winners and losers, this is where discount cards suddenly came in. They're like, oh, you're unfortunately the loser. Let me give you a discount card. But what lies behind most discount cards are the very entities that were spreading you in the first place. So if someone asked me this the other day, like, why would carriers do this? I go, the cash market might be 6% of drugs in the United States. And so if 94% of the time I could serve you up a bad price and your employer still pays for it, or the federal government or you, those are great odds. Yeah, I'm going to keep the system that we have. And you know what? Even if you end up on that discount card, I'm still going to make money because I process those as well, almost in the same proportional rate as my market share. And so it's a system of, unfortunately, greed built on top of greed. And it's a system where I would say many legacy entities have no interest in changing because it's so lucrative. And so what we decided to do is let's just expose what this price really is. A lot of people don't know there's $7 to $10 to $12 of fees loaded into a discount card. So even though it's a better price, it's still way too expensive. And I point this out as a full service PBM. On average, we make about $5 per script processing, and that includes a lot of work. You got accumulator files, eligibility feeds, you're dealing with drug utilization review, clinical oversight, call centers, quarterly reviews. You have a lot that goes into managing an employer, and we're making $5. For a discount card that has none of these things, they're making 7 to 10. So we just said, let's just take our NADAC pricing from our friends at the federal government and give it to the American public for a 99-cent charge. That's it. It doesn't change. Here it is. And you know what's fascinating? Retail pharmacies really liked it. They're like, you know what? This is fair. I'm still making my fee, their dispensing fee. It's based upon cost plus acquisition. They're never upside down. No one's coming back to them in 6 months to claw back money. And suddenly they're like, I don't mind this discount card in my store. And I think this is what we wanted to do with our Capital RX Advantage, which is let's democratize price. And it begins with bringing an unbiased source of pricing, the federal government using NADAC, flat fee charge of 99 cents. That's it. And you've heard this model before. I say this, someone says, why does this sound familiar? This is every industry in the United States. The example I give is, let's just take the financial industry. 20 years ago, if I were to trade stock, Merrill Lynch could keep 10% of the value of my trade. It almost sounds criminal when I say that aloud. And then people like E-Trade and Ameritrade came along and said, I'll do it for $59.95 and $19.95. And then Robinhood came around and said, I'll do it for $0. Well, guess what? On my Chase account, I could trade stock for $0 now because that's the new benchmark. And it basically took all that cost and stripped it out. And it made a very complex, unapproachable system approachable and seamless. And it removed the opacity that went with those programs. And I see this happening in healthcare today. So I think my summary statement is the future is bright. I think the legislative arm of the federal government could be very helpful, but I think innovation from companies like ourselves and others are going to play a very significant role. And I think organizations like yourself helping us bring these topics to people and helping them understand you do have choices, the world is changing, and it's for the benefit of the payer and the patient.
Well, thank you so much, AJ. This has been a really enlightening conversation. As you say, a complex issue, and yet in some ways a simple one, that we just need to move drug pricing towards how we price literally everything else.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a great conversation.
Thanks, Fiona. Thanks, Susan.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you both so much. And thank you, as always, to all of our listeners for tuning in, for liking, subscribing, sharing the podcast with a friend. If you found this interesting, please help us get the word out to more folks. As always, I'll include a list of links with this to some of the coverage that Sue's team has done around drug pricing over the past few months. And until next time, keep innovating, keep being a healthcare changemaker.